Good morning. It's still morning. Good morning. All right, I know we stand between you and lunch, so we're going to make this fun, quick, and efficient. I hope you can hear me. My name is Sriram Vishwanath. If that's tricky pronouncing, Sri like in shrimp, Ram like in CD-ROM, Sriram. And I'm a professor here in the Cockrell School of Engineering. And I'm looking forward to an exciting panel on the tech of blockchain. I know the previous panel was very engaging and a lot of back and forth. So we're hoping to build on that. Hopefully your questions will also be the same, so we'll have time for Q&A at the end. But I'm excited to introduce three panelists: Tim Brown from USAA, Rohit from Chainworks, and Bertrand from IBM. So what we'll do is I'm asking each panelist to introduce themselves for a few minutes. Then I have a list of questions, and we can leave it informal. Please let me know if there's something you really are dying to ask, and then we'll open it up to questions. So again, I'm a professor in engineering, so I do come at it from a different perspective, or from a tech perspective. And I know there's a whole spectrum, which was, I think, well realized in the previous panel and before that as well. So I'm looking forward to both technical questions at me, as well as the panel, and more business questions at the panel. So with that, I'll turn it over to Tim. Tim, do you want to go first?
Sure. My name is Tim Brown. I'm with USAA. Do I have USAA members out there? Okay, so we have some folks that understand what we are. We're a different type of financial services firm. We focus on the military members and their families. So anybody who's ever honorably served, that's who we serve. We are not a public, so our membership is a true owned membership. They are part owners of the company. We also have insurance, so I'm going to be speaking today from a context of not just banking or insurance, but a full financial services realm. So how blockchain might be able to help us further our value and service to our members. And I've been with the firm almost 30 years now. So.
Awesome. Rohit?
Thank you, Professor Sriram. Can you guys hear me okay? Is this thing working?
Is it working okay? I know mine is, but can you hear them?
Maybe someone, oh, now it is.
There we go.
Yeah, so must be the thing at the back. Cool. Well, first off, thank you very much to UT Austin and McCombs School for putting this great show together. Shout out to Professor Conan and Professor Funkasi. Seems like just yesterday when we started talking about doing something like this, and glad to see this great conference, it's come together really well. So like Professor Sriram said, my name is Rohit Tandon, and I've been in the enterprise software space for about 26 years. The last part of my corporate career was with Oracle Corporation as a product leader for about 12 plus years. And it seems like anytime you go to a blockchain conference, people are interested in the Bitcoin aha moment. My personal Bitcoin aha moment was 2012. And for me to kind of realize what was going on here, a lot of things had to come together. I used to build trading systems and used to sell them to hedge funds on the side. And so I had some grounding from that perspective. I had been introduced to, through the trading forums, introduced to the Austrian School of Economics and the concept of money. So I think all of those factors played a role, and when I saw the white paper, Bitcoin as money kind of had an immediate epiphany with me. In 2013, I built a Bitcoin exchange, proposed to launch that in India. And if you guys think regulatory conditions are bad today, we could have gone to jail for doing that in 2013. So we kind of shelved the project, but by that time we had learned the Bitcoin protocol. And I kind of knew that this would make its way into enterprise. Sorry, Jimmy Song. So what I've done over the last few years is I have two entities, Elevon Data, which is a big data analytics firm focused on basically moving enterprise data to the cloud. And then I have another initiative called Chainworks, which is focused on enabling blockchain for the enterprise. And we're working on several products in that space. I've been advising ICOs since 2016. I still have two active engagements. One is putting artificial intelligence on the blockchain via the concept of nuances or smart data. In computing terms, it's about bringing process to data instead of taking and shuttling data all the time to the processes. And the second one is in the enterprise software space out of Silicon Valley. It's about enterprise relationship management on blockchain. Glad to be here. I don't know how we're going to better the previous panel.
Bertrand?
Bertrand Portier with IBM. Show of hands. What does IBM stand for?
I'll be Macintosh when I grow up.
And it's not I'm by myself either.
Anybody?
International Blockchain Machines, exactly. So my background is in software. I joined IBM as a software engineer after spending 2 semesters at UT Austin. And for the last few years, I spent time with clients and mainly in financial services. And my job is to help our financial services clients evaluate and adopt blockchain in the context of their business. So I like to say that I am a business-savvy technologist. And when we look at blockchain for business, and maybe this is a way to kick off, the technical discussion, right? What do we need, right, when we are talking blockchain for business, blockchain in the context of our businesses? And there are about 5 things that are really important. The first one, we can argue that blockchain needs to be a global public or it's private, but there is one thing we need with blockchain for business is the concept of permissioned blockchain. Right? We need to know the identity of the participants. The second thing we need is that we need to have a level of privacy supported within the business network. We have a network, but then within that business network, there is private data, there are private transactions. Then we need to be able to perform. Right? We need to go to thousands of transactions per second if we want to ever apply this in production. And this is where, for example, in our approach, we don't do mining at all. We don't do proof of work because it doesn't scale. And then you have different things about the architecture. One of them also is that you need to be able to scale the architecture, and you scale the architecture by being able to deploy more smart contracts, by being able to onboard new members to your blockchain. And the architecture needs to be modular. So depending on what you're trying to do and the level of trust, for example, you can use different consensus mechanisms. But I would say the most important thing about blockchain when it comes to it, if you want to ever be able to trust that software, right, that code that is there, is that the code needs to be developed in the open. And when I'm saying that, I'm not just saying that somebody developed the code, donated it to the open source, put it on GitHub, and that's open source. What I'm talking about is true open governance to develop the code that makes the foundation of the blockchain technology. And this is why in IBM we are a founding member and a contributor to the Hyperledger under the Linux Foundation. And we can talk more about that approach as we go through the panel.
Awesome. Thank you very much. So I have a few questions I'm going to volunteer, but I'm looking forward to your questions as well. The first one is I want to build off the previous panel and say, so this sort of trustless computing, distributed or decentralized trustless systems has been a research area we've been working on for a long time. And at the core of it, blockchain is a hash linked list. What makes it so exciting for the enterprise? We've done, research has been going on it on the technical side for ages, but clearly something has sparked a great interest in it in the past less than a decade. What is it about this hash linked list that makes it so exciting?
Was that towards me? Okay, so I'll represent the enterprise here, is that what? So,
beginning with you.
Perfect. No, I appreciate that. So, from the last panel, I think there's a lot of truth in both what Jimmy and Ron were saying. I wouldn't say I would fall on either side. You definitely have a developer or a coder that sees it from a very specific perspective, which I actually have to agree with. And then I look at Ron in terms of the application of how you start to think about solving business problems with a term blockchain, whether you like it or not, actually opens up a paradigm. Now, I've got advanced research, so I look at things in different ways. My team does in different ways. And what we've seen about blockchain is it allows us to start solving problems in a different perspective. The underlying technology and all the rest of that, fundamentally, to Jimmy's point, is the same, but the paradigm has changed. And I think that's really important that we all understand is the paradigm is starting to shift. And the paradigm is going from centralized control to decentralized consensus. And that's just the fundamental regarding blockchain. That's all it is. So for us, here's what that means. Within insurance, we have this process called subrogation, which means that if you're in an accident, let's say for my members out there, I just pay them off. I don't worry about who's at fault in the beginning or how much the estimates are. I then work it out with the other person that they hit or hit them. They're insured. And that's called, we're going to work it out together between the other insurance company and us. That's called subrogation. There is a lot of intermediaries in that process. An intermediary to validate whether who's at fault, intermediaries that are there for the estimates around the expenses as well as health expenses, all sorts of other players in this. Here's the challenge. I have to pay every one of those. And what we're paying for is validation of truth that the other insured company is going to come back with a different negotiation price. So I have to pay for every one of those. What if I can use a technology to eliminate having to pay for that because it's already built in? That truth and transparency is already built into the network. And within a consensus of how we want to play by the rules, all of that gets eliminated. So from an industry standpoint, that's huge. That's huge. I'm taking $500 million, even more, out of the process, which then translates to lower premiums for you. So would I be interested in this? Absolutely. And so what hashing allows us to do is continue to build on top of each transaction and allows insurers to build together a claim file. It allows us to do different types of things. Now, could we do that on a centralized database? Yes. But my question is, who owns it? If I have it decentralized, we all own it. It's all transparent. So this is a paradigm. So from a technical standpoint, yeah, there's other things that are introduced like tokenization that's going to be huge because it'll simplify things, especially in identity space. That's going to be the next big Bitcoin implementation, by the way, even more than Subro, but that'll be the next global thing is identity, and that's coming. And Ron talked about it. Self-sovereign identity is going to be the next big thing. We should talk about that more, too.
Awesome. So continuing that trend, in terms of enterprise applications, Tim was mentioning how the decentralized aspect of trustless negotiation between institutions is powerful. Do you see tokenization also having an incentive mechanism on that having any power, Rohit, or where do you see a lot of the value?
Strictly for enterprise space?
Yes.
Okay. So before I get into
Primarily
that,
for enterprise.
Yeah, I just want to build on Tim's argument a little bit. And blockchain is a philosophy with many technical properties. That's something we need to let sink in. Let me give you an example. When the space program was launched, the explicitly stated mission was to go to space. It wasn't to build a personal computer. It wasn't to build a microwave. It wasn't to build cameras. And actually, there's 17 more things that came out of the space program. I call it the tale of unintended consequences, right? Similarly, we all get where Jimmy Song is coming from. And I actually, in dog years, I'm from his era. So I understand his perspective pretty well. But I'm also a person who's trying to build a business on blockchain via Chainworks, right? So I have to crack the code and figure out how this works for enterprise. So similarly, blockchain, the very first invention is actually P2P electronic cash transfer mechanism. That's the title of the very first thing that happened in the blockchain space, and that's the title of the Bitcoin white paper, right? Now that white paper has had its own tale of unintended consequences, and that's what he was referring to. Those unintended consequences arising from the linked list are transparency, authenticity, verification, self-sovereign identity, a shared data layer, so on and so forth. Let me break it down. I see 3 use cases for enterprise. Everything is simply a technical property underneath that. The 3 broad use cases are value transfer, number 1, which aligns with Bitcoin, right? Number two is you spawned a database which is decentralized, distributed, and actually, if you think in enterprise terms, which is some experience people may not have, but anytime any business does business with a third party or a counterparty, you actually have a shared business process. So we've done business in this way. We have a shared business process, but we don't have a shared data layer. What does that do? Everybody maintains their own silos. You work with supplier has its own silo. You really don't know what the supplier's product list looks like, what the supplier's price book looks like today. And if you're like a Walmart and you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of suppliers globally, it's a nightmare. Walmart does EDI on like 3 times basis. In one aspect, blockchain is like EDI on steroids, right? So the second use case is the shared data layer. And the third and the most complex one is the trust disruption, right? And that's going to be the hardest to solve. Because, it's easy to say, oh, blockchain is a trust disruptor, and it's going to actually spawn new trust models, right? It's going to spawn new trust models, but do we really have a grasp of what that means in terms of bringing all these parties together on a private blockchain network? I've been working with in the enterprise space, and we've already done some POCs. That's going to be the hardest problem to solve, actually, from a governance point of view.
I see.
Did I cover your question?
You did.
Okay.
I did want to specifically dig a little further into what do you think would there be incentives and enterprise that would be, for example, tokenization schemes or anything else that would be enterprise related that would make a difference? Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, of course, yeah. So I think, by now everybody's heard of a direct parallel to 1990s and .com. I'm older, my age is liberating, I can speak my mind just like Jimmy. I'm not afraid of that. So we're following a direct parallel from 1990s. When internet came along, let me tell you a couple of things. We as B2C people did not want to swipe our card on the internet, credit cards, number one. Number two, businesses ran the other door if we said, put your applications on internet. They didn't want to do it. What did they say? No, can we just bring this TCP/IP thing in-house and let's call it intranet? And let's build our applications there. Let's bring our ecosystem into that. That's what the permission blockchains are. So, where are we now 20 years hence? Intranet still exists, internet still exists. But today, as a business, I might go to a third-party site and enter my banking information, which through a API actually is sent to a bank. And actually, I'm letting the site, like Credit Karma, I got to give them all my banking access. I got to give them my all other accesses. And so today, businesses are interacting on the public internet layer protocol, right? Similarly, the path we're going to take here is we're going to start out with permission networks, right? And then you will have all these permissionless networks outside. But we got to put this thing in context and think application architecture. Every business has an application architecture, right? And you have your business logic, and you're going to have smart contracts is one tiny sliver of that business logic where the value needs to be transferred, from an enterprise architecture point of view. However, the permissionless infrastructure, in my view, when all is said and done, will become a global settlement layer. And the businesses will be interacting through their permission networks with the permissionless networks. So incentives will come in, tokenization will come in, but it's too far out. Right now, it's not going to happen.
In the long term. Yeah. So Bertrand, on the same vein, in fact, in your introduction, you also mentioned that there'll be a non-proof of work, or there is a heavier emphasis on non-proof of work for scalability to get this for the enterprise in a manner that makes sense. Can you comment more on enterprise applications and how going off of proof of work for scalability is the right architecture?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at this, right, like blockchain, as was discussed, is really a foundational technology. It's a foundational capability, and then you apply that in the context of your specific business or things that you're trying to do, right? So we can have a blockchain network for subrogation claims. We can have a blockchain network for international payments. We can have a blockchain network for international insurance policies, whatever. And then what we do to make blockchain specific to our application, we we do what we call smart contracts, right? So we develop smart contracts that are going to set the rules and clauses, etc., that are important for the network. You know, what are the conditions that have to be met for this transaction to happen, right? And then for us, the way we do, we reach consensus is that every time we deploy a smart contract onto the blockchain, and I'm talking about Hyperledger Fabric, to give an example. So every time we deploy a smart contract, associated with that smart contract, we have an endorsement policy. So they go together. And we define for this specific smart contract, who are the peers who need to validate the transaction, right? And who needs to take part in the consensus mechanism, right? So we define that, it gets deployed, and then when transactions happen, you know, these peers that signed up and that have a responsibility to validate and sign, they're going to get requests and they're going to have to execute the smart contracts, sign them, then a different entity is going to order all of these transactions, create blocks, and then all of the peers on the network are going to write to the ledger and commit to the ledger. So when we start to do this, we are more flexible depending on the application that we are trying to do, depending on the level of trust in the network, and we're able to reach, you know, more throughput, transactions per second with low latencies, more scalability in terms of adding members and smart contracts. So this is just one example where we don't have to, the members of the network do not necessarily trust each other, but we don't have to use a compute-intensive proof of work to provide that trust to the network.
In essence, is there a fair degree of multi-sig that goes into this? Sort of distributed consensus mechanisms that are beyond proof of work, where there is trust, but there is not issues in what we call Byzantine Consensus, which is you're able to reach consensus in a scalable manner without a great degree of trust in each individual. And that is realized. Fantastic. Maybe this time I'll go this way. So I'll start first with you. In terms of what IBM does and contribution to Hyperledger, what do you think are the challenges that enterprise face on the technical side in adopting blockchain? It's both I'm sure some amount of friction in the process, given what the enterprise has been doing today. Yeah. So what does the enterprise need to do to be able to make that shift?
Yes, that's a good question, and actually it's not so much about the technology when you look at, you know, the adoption challenges. End of last year, I wrote a blog post and I said, these are my 5, you know, New Year's resolutions for blockchain, and only one of them was about the technology. Right? When I look at what happened last year with the engagements that I was on, like the number one issue was not so much about the technology and which platform do you use, because when you look at a specific vertical and specific business use case, it's going to become pretty obvious what platform is going to make sense, right? What blockchain technology makes sense, right, for that use case, right? And here we're not talking about white paper types of technology. We're talking about robust blockchain technologies, right? Some of them came from white papers, not all, right? So once you look at it, then the technology is not the biggest challenge, but then the challenge becomes related to the network, right? So who are the other members that are going to be in the network with you? Because with blockchain, you are not going to be in charge of everything, right? Even if you're Walmart, if you remember Frank's example this morning, right? You know, we have that food trust, you know, distributed network, but and it's not linear. It's not one company that can be in charge of a central database. So how do you incentivize these other participants to join you in that effort? Who do you bring on at which point? And how do you also, which can be really tricky, and Tim knows that because he does innovation, how do you create some type of business case for these companies to invest with you? And sometimes you don't have a business case because it's innovation. And when it's disruptive innovation, there's not always a business case. But there has to be something in it for me to join and participate in the network. So you set up those governance rules, you set up a business model, and you never start with the technology. That's not how it works.
Understood. So moving on to you, Rohit, what would you say are, as you said, non-technical and technical challenges in the enterprise clients you worked with in adoption?
Yeah. There's several. From a technology perspective, since we've been building applications, I'll say, and we've worked with Quorum, which is basically an Ethereum's permission flavor. We work a lot on Hyperledger. We're building our own products on top of that. EOS and IOTA and so on and so forth. So pretty much most protocols that might be applicable to the corporate world. Technology-wise, I'll say it's pre-HTML days. And I won't even blink an eye. It's very low level, even Hyperledger, the interfaces and the way you have to kind of build up the networks, it's pre-HTML right now. So there's a long way to go. There's other things like poor documentation, and you have to make things work, and you have to have a very low level understanding. And so my hiring is actually focused on a lot of the people who originated from the Unix world, understand Java, understand C, so, object-oriented programming, so on and so forth. So, I've been able to overcome it that way. From a more philosophical debate point of view, I think he was right on the right track. You bring these business networks together, what is, and the reality is, and I have customers, through my two entities, the reality is, if, let's say you're a payment processor, and you're reconciling invoices between suppliers and distributors and retailers on the other side, and you want to bring together a supplier hub on the blockchain, right? And you do that, and out of those, let's say, 10,000 suppliers, right? About 80% are actually mom and pop shops. They don't even believe in data entry. Even today, they send in handwritten invoices. So how does blockchain crack that, right? So that's one example. The other big thing is bringing these networks together, and I think our learnings will come from the banking consortium and R3, where they've been able to bring consortiums together. Insurance is doing one, but the challenge is, how do you tell these participants to run a node? It costs money, right? Why would you run the node? You can have non-tangible arguments, as in the earlier example for suppliers that, don't you want your retailers to have the, just-in-time information about your products and your price book? It increases your competitiveness. And, the overarching theme is the world is moving towards real-time transactions. And if you're not a web-native company like Amazon, right, you don't have that privilege because you were born on the web. Amazon has a universal product catalog, Walmart does not, right? So that's the challenge they've been trying to solve. So how do you bring these consortiums together? What is the incentive for them? Cost sharing, and so on and so forth. The broad term for that is governance. How do you bring it together?
So Tim, I want to build on that. Sounds like in the insurance industry, you really found something that would work well across businesses. There's a consortium of effort where there would be, between institutions, a mechanism of coming to consensus that is scalable and makes sense. Would you say the insurance industry has built a model that's applicable across different domains? Is what is being built for solving the claims problem a model that can be replicated in other domains?
It's a great question. Here's the way we look at it. It really starts with a common business problem within the industry. One that we all recognize that needs to be solved but just hasn't been solved. And that provides alignment, right? And so we're all motivated to be able to solve this problem. And it just so happens that the technology underneath that, or the framework that is built for blockchain, could help us with that. Again, regardless of the details of if it's a database or those types of things, the paradigm is we're coming together to be able to solve this problem, but it starts there. So if you translate that to other parts of the industry, whether it's banking or investment management or those types of things within an enterprise, within industry consensus, yeah, it could work, but you got to start there. We've seen consortiums fall apart, or I would argue just not be productive because they didn't have a common vision of what the problem was. So one of the biggest challenges for enterprise is this is a team sport with your competitors. I mean, just think about that. So we've got to get a consensus with competitors. So how do you do that to solve industry problems but still differentiate your product from anybody else's? That's the challenge that's faced with this model, right? So enterprise is still struggling with that right now. And so to be real honest with you, it's to the earlier panel's points, it's not going to move that fast, mainly because of that issue. So for us, you got to figure out what's the right way to start attacking it. Now, one that's more, I will call Bitcoin-like or cryptocurrency-like in terms of a problem to solve is identity. Because identity impacts everyone, just like currency or value impacts everyone across the globe. Identity does too. Now, identity is going to start getting solved in a very similar way, in my opinion, as cryptocurrency has, but it's going to be a little bit more prescriptive because you have to involve government, you have to involve academia, you have to involve these things. But there's promises out there of the value associated with that model that really doesn't translate into enterprise. But enterprise is dependent on identity, as you can imagine. So there's different models. If you look at industry, solving business, common industry problems, yeah, you can look to go ahead and look at other models to be able to guide you and de-risk your portfolio associated with blockchain implementations associated with that. That's what we've done. Is we've watched others have successes and failures, and we've learned from that. But I would say other problems like identity is more global in nature and has a totally different type of set of problems and solutions that need to go with it.
I just wanted to add a little bit to what Tim said, because I spent a lot of time with insurance carriers, and the consortium aspect is very good to look at the long-term impact, for example, of blockchain on the industry. And you work with consortium, and like Tim said, you work with your competitors, right? You work with your peers. So things are not going to move very fast, and you're going to have a lot of people at the table. And not exclusive to that, there is another approach that I've seen my clients take as well, in addition to consortium, is really to have a founder-led network where you get together with your own ecosystem, you get together with your own clients and business partner, and you found and you activate a blockchain network in that respect. And that gives you an edge, that gives you a competitive advantage, better client experience, etc., as compared to your competitors. So consortiums, industry, utilities, subrogation, claims, reinsurance, etc., give you an edge, founder-led network. AIG did multinational reinsurance. They issued multinational reinsurance on the blockchain, right? And they did that with their own clients and partners to start with.
Awesome. So I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions. We only have a little bit of time left, so please.
Firstly, thank you all for your service, for being here today to talk to us. We appreciate this. The thing you were talking about regarding like identity and it being all of those edge components that aren't really affecting one enterprise company, I liked the discussion you were kind of having there about that aspect of it. Is there an opportunity here for this to be disruptive for smaller businesses to potentially rise up and allow a bit more edge value, collaboration, that kind of thing? We always talk about it from the enterprise standpoint, but it seems opportunistic for smaller businesses or medium-sized businesses to better cooperate or things like that.
Yeah, I'll offer up my thoughts. We're actually partnering and invested in some small businesses that focus purely on identity. And so there's, especially for us, as you can imagine, since our membership is military, we need to authenticate that they're military-based. So there's identity firms, small business, that are actually targeted just to do that for us because of the type of niche that we have. But we've also found other, niche companies that have gone through authentication type of solutions, verification solutions, identity exchange solutions. So there's going to be even exchanges in the future that are going to be around identity and the value associated with that. So think of it in this way. I believe, and this is just Tim's perspective on looking at that, identity is going to be a new sense of currency that has its own value that small business can actually take advantage of and actually harness that value working with enterprises, other customers, biometrics, whatever, and be able to offer that out on a market even. So there's real opportunity for small business to get involved in this, and there's so many aspects to it. So I would say absolutely there is. That's my opinion.
I know there's one other, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So there's a couple perspectives on this panel about the future blockchain technology framework. You're enterprise, you're tech. How many blockchains do we need? In a world where we have 3 or 4 major operating systems for computing, and we have millions of people who know how to write applications, we've got 20 plus operating systems for blockchain, all different protocol layers. First of all, how does USAA choose which blockchain to write with? And how many, this is an impossible question to answer, I understand. How many do we need? And why should we propagate more? And when do we think that we'll find the answer?
I have an answer. I don't know if you want to answer first.
To me, again, this is not just about the technology. What we are starting to see is the concept of networks of networks. Right? You look at these foundational capabilities that are required by pretty much most business processes. What do you need to do at the beginning of a business process? Well, you need to verify the identity of your participants. So identity is a capability, and we are going to see identity networks right out there. And these identity networks are going to be based on specific technology, but when they are successful, we will not be talking about the fact that they are based on Hyperledger or Ethereum. We are just going to be talking about the fact that they provide self-sovereign, decentralized identity. Right? And think about payments, same thing, right? We're going to have payments network that are used to settle at the end of the business process. And the technology that is better suited for that is going to win, right? But it really comes down to what is the network doing, what is the goal of the network, and then once you really understand that, like if you're talking about nano payments for IoT devices, well, this is the IOTA, IOTA tokens kinds of things, right? So if you start to look at it from the concept of what is the network trying to do, then it becomes easier to see what platform to use.
Can I provide a perspective?
Please do.
So again, it's following a very predictable path. It's like saying how many ERPs do we need? So what's going on here is you have horizontal use cases and you have vertical use cases. When it comes to horizontal use cases, if you have to spin up, at Chainworks we coined a term called business value network. Each of these networks that are arising is a BVN, and the BVN can be purpose specific, in which case it's vertical, and you will have to figure out either you take a fork of Hyperledger or Quorum or Ethereum and you create something of your own, layer something on top of it. If it is horizontal and you simply have to spin up a shared data layer, Hyperledger is perfect for that. It takes less than 8 hours to do something like that, right? So, but if you look at, so it's following a very predictable path of how the whole ERP space developed in 1990s to where we're down to about 4 major ones, but you still have a lot of dominant vertical ERPs, like Lawson is still around, right? Managistics is still around, right? Why are they still here, right? Because they're purpose specific. So in the end, like Bertrand was pointing out, you will have these BVNs and what I call as the rise of business value networks. These will need to interoperate, not just within your boundaries, but cross-entity as well. So that's my perspective.
And just real quickly, it's a great question because it's one we struggle with all the time is, okay, what do we jump into? And there's no easy answer to that. And here's the way we look at it is, first it's got to solve a business problem we care about. And so if it can't define that really clearly, then we're not going to get into it. We're just not worth it, worth the energy. But at the same time, we've got to look at where momentum is, not the fear of missing out. That's not what I'm talking about, and that's what a lot of the hype is about right now is, oh, I've got to get on blockchain. I have no idea what it is, but kind of like what Jimmy was saying. But it really goes about being very discerning as to where you need to place your bets. Because there are a lot of opportunities out there, more than there should be, let's say, but it's very defragmented. What I'm starting to see is very fragmented. What's starting to happen is you're starting to see alignment starting to happen, and where that's happening, that's where you can get your keys as to, okay, there may be some momentum here, especially if they have a clear business problem they're trying to solve right in the middle. And so those are the types of opportunities we look for because we can't place every bet out there. So it's almost like the stock market. You got to kind of watch the trends, see what's going. If there's some value and there's some movement in the stock, then you decide how you want to place your bet.
And what blockchain are you doing in USAA?
There's a couple of different things that we're doing. I mean, I can't get into all the details of that, but we're starting with, our key is aligning with our business partners to see what problems they're looking to solve. And then we'll look at the industry as to where the momentum is going and with a business problem in the center of that momentum. And then we'll bring it back to the business. And if that works with their priority, then that's the value that we add. So we actually have, in all of our lines of business, some kind of investment in that.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and I know lunch is awaiting you. So there's a quick question, very quick question. Please. So question is, what is scalable in the blockchain world?
Sustainable and scalable.
Sustainable and scalable. Does that involve proof of work or it doesn't? Very quick.
So just don't do mining, don't do proof of work. Use different ways to endorse your transactions, to validate them, and to agree and get consensus.
So with that, I would like to conclude this. Appreciate it. Thank you.